Program Director, the Makanda family, Your Majesties, Chiefs, Royal Families, the National Heritage Council Board, led by Chairperson Dr. Mbuli, and the CEO, Advocate Nxele, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start my presentation today with this quote. I have traveled across the length and breadth of Africa, and I have not seen one person who's a beggar, who is a thief. Such wealth I have seen in this country, such high moral values, people of such caliber, that I do not think will ever conquer this country unless we broke the very backbone of this nation, which is her spiritual and cultural heritage, and therefore I propose we replace her old and ancient education system, her culture, for if the African think that all that is foreign and English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them, a truly dominated nation. These were the words of Lord Macaulay addressing the British Parliament on the 2nd of February, 1835. I extend my warmest greetings to all of you this afternoon as we would be discussing and conversing about the Battle of Ekhazini. The Battle of Ekhazini was the 5th of the 9 wars of resistance which took place in the Eastern Cape region of the Cape Colony between 1770s and 1870s. The first of these wars broke out in 1778 and the last took place in 1878. Hence the label, the 100 Years of Wars of Resistance. Umgov Mbeki characterized these wars correctly as imfazwe zophuco, wars of dispossession. At the heart of all 9 wars of resistance was colonial land invasion, large-scale displacement of indigenous African people from their traditional territories, and massive land dispossession. The chieftaincies consisting of the Khoi, San, and Amaxhosa, such as Gunukwebe and Imidange, were heavily involved in the first 4 wars of resistance. All in all, a total of 7 wars of resistance involved the Ndlambe people. The longest of these wars involved Maqoma in 1850s. After the Battle of Ekhazini, which was the 5th frontier war, Makanda Nxele surrendered himself to Wiltshire and pleaded with him that he should stop capturing Xhosa cattle and to stop destroying the Xhosa economy because the people are starving due to his actions. Now, who was Makanda Nxele? Makanda Nxele is estimated to have been born around 1779 to 1780 in the area of Kagqiwa River in Katyana. Makanda's father, Gwala, was Xhosa and part of the Amaxhosa clan, but he died when Makanda was still young. His mother was a Khoi woman, and Makanda may have inherited his divine spiritual inclinations from her, that is a mother. When Gwala died, Makanda's mother moved him, his elder brother and 2 sisters, to the home of Balala. Makanda was fairly acquainted with the Dutch language and European culture, which historians attribute to the employment of his father on a Boer farm near Uitenhage, as well as the influence of missionaries in his life, such as Johannes van der Kemp. He could see that Christianity, as presented by the missionaries, was tarnished with imperialistic intentions. In fact, this is one thing which Europeans do not acknowledge amongst our people, that they were able to make their own independent thinking and observations. He also knew that of making amaXhosa subordinate to the Europeans, socially, politically, spiritually, and so on. Hence, Makanda formulated an understanding of Thixo, being God of whites, and Dalidip as the God of Africans. An individual by the name of Kalanga recognized that Makanda was showing signs of being a diviner. A diviner, or inyanga, in African society, is a person who is believed to have some connection with ancestors, who in turn had connections with Ukamata. Religion for any African society was part of their day-to-day activities and deeply connected to the land that they lived on and used to sustain their livelihoods and institutions. They believed in Kamata and ancestors who served as intermediaries between Kamata and the living. The ancestors also served as protectors of the living. Diviners were individuals chosen by the ancestors and accepted by the people to communicate with the ancestors. Those who emerged to fill that role of Inyanga were persons that displayed an acute awareness and sensitivity to the needs of their respective communities. Let's now connect Makhanda with the Stearman brothers. In her 1980 paper titled David Stearman, the last chief of the Hottentots, Malherbe documents the life of the rebel Stearman, considered in his lifetime a criminal menace by colonialists and a formidable leader by his Khoi and Xhosa kin, for his unrelenting resistance. For his resistance, he would be imprisoned twice on Robben Island and successfully escaped twice. Of importance is that Stearman and Makanda both had the Kunukwa Khoi roots, even though Makanda is often associated only with his Xhosa lineage. However, in his lifetime, Stearman's people in the Eastern Cape came to be rigidly defined as Khoi, even though they were not fully distinct from and were related to amaXhosa. San and Khoi people entered wage labor on Boer farms as shepherds, as servants, farmhands and domestic servants, who exchanged labor for a wage paid mostly in kind and maybe sometimes in cash. Part of that in-kind wage included payment in alcohol, the notorious dope system. Like his people, Ndlambe people, David Stearman had experienced brutal treatment at the hands of the Boer employers. In general, the Stearmans refused to be coerced to give up their independence and were compelled by circumstances to work for farmers. The Stearman clan clung to whatever independence they could, and this required full participation in the military conflicts occurring across their ancestral lands. Alongside the then clan leader, his brother Klaas Stearman and other allies between 1795 and 1803 led expeditions to recapture cattle and land from the Dutch Boer colonialists in the region of his birth between the Hamtos and Fish River. That's the longitudes between Jeffreys Bay and Makanda as a place, crisscrossing through the Karoo interior to the coast. Klaas Tiedeman's justification for conducting this war were labor exploitation, land loss, and cruelty at the hands of Dutch Boers. He reportedly told the British expedition he met near Port Elizabeth in 1799. And this is what he says, and I quote, "Restore the country of which our fathers have been despoiled by the Dutch, and we have nothing more to ask. We lived very contentedly before these Dutch plunderers molested us. And why should we not do so again, if left to ourselves? Has not the Groot Baas given plenty of grassroots and berries and grasshoppers for our use, and, till the Dutch destroyed them, abundance of wild animals to hunt? This is owing to the cruelty suffered at the hands of the farmers. Resolved us at once to collect a sufficient force to deprive the Boers of their arms, in which we have succeeded at every house which had fallen in our way. We have taken their superfluous clothing in lieu of wages due to our services, but we have stripped none, nor injured the persons of any, though we have yet a great deal of our blood to avenge." Quoted in Malherbe. Now, in 1811, the spectre of the returned David Stearman loomed so large in the colony that Colonel John Graham, who was tasked with ejecting Nxele Makhanda from their own areas, was concerned with first getting Stearman out of his alliances with the Maxhosa. We turn to the struggle over land. The land dispossession was characterized by widespread murder and mayhem, the destruction of the African homes, massive displacement of people from their lands, wholesale confiscation of their livestock, which impoverished the once self-sufficient African communities, and the imposition of taxes, which led to the commodification of the African labor power. All of these facts of brutality were justified through an ideology which advanced white supremacy and regarded African people as primitive, backward, and therefore needing to be civilized. The result was denial of human freedom and human dignity to the African population. The levels of brutality against the African people, the unapologetic stripping of their human dignity, and the curtailment of their human freedom grew. Large numbers of black people were forced to sell their labor power to emerging primary and secondary industries through tax-based pieces of legislation on the one hand, whilst they were denied all possibilities of belonging to an emerging nation state which became known as South Africa from 1910 onwards on the other. In June of 1812, that Colonel John Graham had introduced warfare to Maxhosa through gunpoint and the burning of villages and crops, expelling people who had resided there for a century. In fact, this is the man who idealized terror. He would go around preaching that for Maxhosa, he needs to exert maximum terror. And this terror, he would butcher people, men, women, and children, for their own land. And this is the man, later on, a city of the indigenous Amaxhosa people was named after him as Grahamstown. And this is what we are changing to ensure that the indigenous people of that place are respected. In 1812, the city of Grahamstown was established on the land lost by Amandlambe. Not only were the Boers tanked with land parcels, they also shared the cattle confiscated from Amaxhosa. More than 20,000 taken in the 1812 war and more than 30,000 in the 1819 war. Resentment over the expulsion and the loss of Grahamstown never died amongst Amaxhosa. They viewed Grahamstown as their land. Hence, the 1819 attack was, from their perspective, fully justified. This was the political milieu that Makanda was a product of and operated in. His status, authority, and influence had elevated as he embraced Amaxhosa nationality, as illustrated by the taking of his second wife, who was Chief Ndlambe's niece. Although Makanda was born a commoner, he did not die one. We're turning now to the Battle of Ekazini, which is 201 years old this year. This battle was a demonstration of a continuing resistance against colonialism and land dispossession, a resistance that continued until 1994. As we have indicated earlier, that this was the 5th war in the total of 9 over a period of a century. That in itself should tell you that at all times our forebears did not surrender the land. They fought so hard to defend their land. The setback suffered during the 4th Frontier War against British, led by that violent Colonel John Graham in 1812, and the subsequent implementation of earth-scorched policy left a bitter taste amongst Amaxhosa. This is the policy of this very violent man called Colonel John Graham, the scorched earth policy. The Brereton raid of 1818, which resulted in seizing of cattle 10 times more that of Colonel Brown War, sealed Amaxhosa resolve to fight back. Guerrilla tactics were employed in a very organized manner as a build-up to the Battle of Ekazini. And the story of the Battle of Ekazini is one of those very unfortunate tales of South Africa, because it's a story which is told by an enemy. Even when due respect have to be given to how organized our people were and how they were formidable in the battleground, that has never been highlighted. As the forces grew in confidence, more people joined the forces and organized themselves in columns formation, one led by Prince Mdushane, the son of Chief Ndlambe, Prince Pato, son of Chief Kungwa, and another one by Makanda. The preparation for the full-scale war took about 4 months. Historian Noel Mostert, in his seminal work titled Frontiers, the epic of South Africa's creation and the tragedy of the Xhosa people, he writes, Grahamstown was the most significant battle of the 19th century in South Africa. For had Nxele succeeded, the history and character of frontier South Africa indubitably would have been quite different from what followed. AmaXhosa lost more territory to the colonizers and were still hunted down after the Grahamstown battle, as some warriors attempted to fight back. The British had abandoned all manners of civility to exert control over the land they desired for colonial occupation, including their alliance with Chief Ngqika, who tried to stay out of the battle, though some of his people were spotted in that very battle. Apart from breaking the spirit of resistance amongst the Xhosa, the British wanted more. 30,000 cattle were confiscated, cornfields were burnt, and people were expelled from their homes. Thomas Wilshire, a colonial administrator stationed in Grahamstown, found some delight in the macabre practice of the so-called Kafir hunting, in which AmaXhosa were hunted and shot on sight. The plundering of the land, the political subjugation of AmaXhosa, and the confiscation of their cattle as spoils of war were familiar to the eastern frontier. At this point, chiefs had to resort to negotiations to ensure survival of their people. As such, two women acting as diplomats, said to be the wives of Makanda, entered the camp of Anders Stockenstrom. Thereafter, Makanda unexpectedly entered the camp and offered himself in surrender as a hostage to be kept on the promise that his life would be spared so that the negotiations could be pursued. Two counselors came to Wilshire's camp and requested peace. Stockenstrom, who was an officer in the colonial forces, defined these men in the following manner, and I quote, "They were as noble-looking men and as dignified in their demeanor as any I have ever beheld," close quote. Makanda's counselor then addressed the English officers in what stands as one of the most moving declarations in South African history of the contact between AmaXhosa and English up until at that time. The counselor said, and I quote, "The war, British chiefs, is an unjust one. For you are striving to extirpate a people from your force to take up arms. When our fathers and the fathers of the Boers, Amabulu, first settled in Zierveld, they dwelt together in peace. Their flocks grazed on the same hills. Their headsmen smoked together out of the same pipes. They were brothers, until the heads of AmaXhosa increased so as to make the hearts of the Boers sore. What those covetous men could not get from our fathers for old buttons, they took by force. Our fathers were men. They loved their cattle, their wives and children, lived upon milk. They fought for their property. They began to hate the colonialists who converted their all and aimed at their destruction. Now, their kraals and our fathers' kraals were separate. The Boers made commandos on our fathers. Our fathers drove them out of the Zierveld, and we dwelt there because we had conquered it. The white men hated us, but could not drive us away. When there was a war, we plundered you. When there was peace, some of our bad people stole, but our chiefs forbade it. Your treacherous friend, Nxele, always had peace with you, yet when his people stole, he shared in the plunder. But he was your friend. You wished to possess the Zilveld. You came at last like locusts, referring to Graham's campaign now in 1812. We stood. We could do no more. You said, go over the Fish River. That is all that we want. We yielded and came here. We lived in peace. Some bad people stole, perhaps. Nxele stole, his chief stole, his people stole. You sent him copper, you sent him beads, you sent him horses on which he rode to steal more. To us, you send only commandos, close quote. We quarreled with Nxele about grass, no business of yours. And here, it's a very important point Councillor is making, that the small fights amongst African people were no business of the colonialist, because we knew that when we fought as African people, we knew there is time for us to allow peace amongst ourselves. You sent commandos. You took our last cow. You left only few calves, which died for want, along with our children. You gave half of the spoils to Nxele, half you kept yourself. Without milk, our corn destroyed. We saw our wives and children perish. We saw that we must ourselves perish. We followed, therefore, the tracks of our cattle into the colony. We plundered. We fought for our lives. We found you weak. We destroyed your soldiers. We saw that we were strong. We attacked you. And we attacked your headquarters, the Grahamstown. If we had succeeded, our right was good. For you began the war. We failed, and you are here. We wish for peace. We wish to get milk for our children. But your troops cover the plains, swam in the thickets, where they cannot distinguish the man from the woman, and shoot all. You want us to submit to Nxele. That man's face is fair to you, but his heart is false. Leave him to himself. Make peace with us. Let him fight for himself, and we shall not call on you for help. Set Makanda at liberty and Ndlame, and the rest will come to make peace with you. But if you still make war, you may indeed kill the last man of us. But Nxele shall not rule over the followers of those who think him a woman, close quote. Nevertheless, the British were not moved with all this, and they continued to clear out the territory between the Fish and the Kiskama rivers of all of Amaxhosa. Stockenstrom summed up the whole episode in the following lines. Such was the Wiltshire War, unfortunately brought on by our interference with a quarrel which did not concern us, and our taking from a vast population the flocks upon which they, men, women, and children, were exclusively dependent for their very existence. But when revenge, starvation, and desperation drove them into the colony, and when successful retaliation elated them and inspired them with contempt with British power, the question had become whether we or the Gaffers should possess the colony, and if every nerve had not been strained on our part to follow up great check inflicted by Wiltshire in Grahamstown. The question might have remained doubtful until overwhelming reinforcements could have been sent from the mother country, close quote. In the aftermath of the Nxele's war, Stearman's activities continued to cause colonialists to believe he was behind multiple plots and revolts. Thus, he was arrested and sent to Robben Island by August of 1819. In 1823, Stearman was recaptured and banished to Australia, where he died in 1830. These battles in the Eastern Cape had a great influence across the country and perhaps the continent, as demonstrated by the following battles. The Battle of Nxele, involving Zulu Kingdom under King Dingaan, Kasenza Ngakhona, and the four trackers on the 16th of December 1838, drew inspiration from the Eastern Cape-based wars. And these were the wars of resistance, which we spoke of in 1778 to 1830s. The Pedi under King Sekhukhune and the Zulu under King Cetshwayo Kampande in 1870s were a continuation of the earlier Eastern Cape examples. King Manelik led the Ethiopian forces at the Battle of Adwa. This was the climactical battle of the First Italo-Ethiopian War. The Ethiopian forces defeated the Italian invading force on Sunday the 1st, 1896. It is at this nexus of land dispossession and labor coercion for Cape Colony farms that the South African working class was first formed. Industrial stage of mining labor was a second phase. The struggle of the early wage earners in South Africa were actually struggles for the land. As the African proverb goes, the story of the hunt will always favor the hunter. And that tale, it's our tale. We must tell our tale, we must tell our story so that our people benefit and they understand when we take particular steps. We are resolute that there is nothing called Grahamstown. That place is Makanda, and will fight until the bitter end to ensure that the rightful owner, Makanda Nxele, as he promised when he was arrested, that he will come back. This time we are saying he is coming back. That place is his, is going to be known as himself, as Makanda. There is no turning back on that. Thank you for your attention.